But one farmer says, seems to me there was a tea party in Boston that was illegal too.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
We shall seek to establish and maintain a dollar which will not change its purchasing and debt-paying power during the succeeding generation.
As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
Government credit and government currency are really one and the same thing. A reserve of gold and a small reserve of silver.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
Well, some people still think it's money.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Junius Maltby channel for a special reading of an article that I found containing very important information. And it's, I've got to move this chair here, sorry. Good pertinent information, good stuff for first-timers as well as veteran stackers. Anyone who is invested in gold and silver, precious metals. However, this article really focuses on gold. Why base your money on gold? Enjoyable read. So for those of you that cannot read on your own and like the narrations as we do here on the channel, I will read the article and discuss it. We'll tear into it. I'll add my commentary. You guys can engage in the discourse down below in the famous YouTube comments section. And I expect there to be, as always, a good thumbs down from somebody who stops by and always gives me the routine thumb down regardless of the content of the video. However, I appreciate all of you who happen to hit the thumbs up because those are always welcome, and it's nice to see some positive feedback as well as engaging with you in the comments section. So again, why base your money on gold? A simple answer for first timers by Nathan Lewis. Excellent piece here. Let's get into it. The United States embraced the principle of a gold standard, a dollar whose value was linked to a defined quantity of gold, from 1789 to 1971. A stretch of 182 years. During this time, the U.S. was the most successful of any major country, expanding from 13 war-ravaged states along the Atlantic seaboard to a world economic superpower, with the broadest and wealthiest middle class the world had ever seen. The U.S. dollar was the premier international currency, and New York was the world's financial capital. If the U.S. gold standard policy was a mistake, as nearly all academic economists claim today, shouldn't there have been some evidence of that after nearly 2 centuries? Shouldn't there have been some kind of negative consequences? Shouldn't there have been some other government somewhere that did even better with a different approach? Very good opening part of the article. It really caught my attention. And I just want to pause for a moment before we continue. We've covered much of the early history of the U.S. Coinage Acts. In the archives there, you can find videos on that. We've also broke down the definition of the word dollar, the root and origin of that word, where it comes from, why the U.S. dollar was struck out of the weight of silver that it is, or that it was at the time, how many dollars there were to make that famous $20 bill note, which represented a full eagle, or what actually a double eagle was $20. An eagle was a $10 denomination. And a lot of people miss that the eagle and double eagle were actually denominations and carried a specific weight of metal. Just like the dollar carried a specific weight in silver, the eagle and the double eagle carried a specific weight in gold. The double eagle being $20, carrying around it was just under an ounce of gold. If you remember, a $20 gold piece carried just shy of an ounce of gold. And at that time, gold was valued at $20.67 an ounce. So 20 silver pieces, 20 silver dollars, would get you a double eagle, just shy of an ounce of gold. And I told you there would be some commentary intermixed with this, and I want to address immediately the comments that I can predict from the opposing view. And those are the ones that are going to say, well, they'll answer the author's question in saying there were economic problems, there were bank runs, or there were bank crises during those periods. Especially we saw some during that expansion during the middle and latter part of the 19th century. Now, there can be discussions on that. A lot of that was Eastern banking influences creating some of these banking panics and trying to attack westward expansion because they wanted to centralize economic power more in the financial sectors of New York and on the East Coast. They didn't want to see some of these mom-and-pop, smaller banking establishments start up on the frontier, especially because the frontier was rich with metals, gold and silver, and a lot of investment opportunity with agricultural land. And so they felt threatened. And also, again, we saw corruption creep into these institutions. Anytime you have men involved, man who is fallible and flawed, you're going to see greed and corruption encroach on what could be a good system. So we saw certain banks issuing more paper promises than they had gold, creating bank panics or people running for the gold, trying to cash in their cash to get gold. We saw the problems that took place during the Civil War with Lincoln issuing the greenback and them having a reduced amount on the open market as far as their exchangeability. We saw the Supreme Court case of Hepburn versus Griswold determine the outcome of an exchange similar to that and a problem that arose. And that was a very big assault and a very big change in the Supreme Court's view as well as the government's view towards the Legal Tender Act. And it really set the stage for what we saw today. And that goes back to, again, a very good critical piece to read. Also, you can find it here on the channel, The Federal War on Gold by Jacob Hornberger. So there's a lot of parts, a lot of pieces, and different side stories that come out of this. And I do not agree that the negative, the negative reputation that some people would place on gold from this time period is accurate. I think a lot of them kind of focus in on it and try to pinpoint things and blame gold. They try to blame literally an inanimate, lifeless, atomic particle that sits on the periodic table as being the cause of these problems, economic problems that might have sprouted out around flaws in the banking system at the time. You cannot blame gold. You have to blame policies, government intervention. Of course, a lot of that, I would blame the government always, the root cause. They create problems, then they try to create solutions, which create more problems, and then they try to be the solution to the problems they created. That's in essence, how government works. So pardon me for the pause here and digressing, but that's very important to point out. I do not agree that the economists that claim there were problems with gold are correct. And I think that gold not only operated, like he says here, for 2 centuries in this country. All you have to do is look at gold as it functioned as a monetary unit of exchange in human history. And we're looking at like 60 to 70 centuries of time. All of old Europe and across the globe, gold and silver served as money. Silver was huge in Asia and in the ancient worlds of Rome and Greece. We saw the Egyptians with gold. We saw the Sumerians. We just covered recently the story that came out of Bulgaria, where a king was buried with a large quantity of gold. And gold has served its role as that one recognizable asset, that one vehicle to transport wealth and where people could move from, let's say, beans or rice or wheat or cattle or land, and then park that wealth, even labor, yes, labor, and park it in silver or gold, and in this case we're talking about gold. The last 20 years of this period, the Bretton Woods era of the 1950s and the 1960s, when the dollar was worth 1/35 of an ounce of gold, was the most prosperous time of the last century, not only in the U.S., but around the world. Pause for a moment. Now this 1/35 of an ounce, remember, this is after 1933, when FDR revalued the dollar, he revalued gold. He seized gold during the Gold Confiscation Act and revalued it from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce by government will, fiat, government mandate. They just willed it into existence. They took the people's gold and said gold is now worth $35 an ounce, immediately, overnight, devaluing the U.S. dollar and all of the dollars held in savings by anyone. They demanded people to turn in their gold certificates, any bills that stated they were redeemable in gold, and they even went as far as to raid safety deposit boxes and seize gold, shipping all of that gold confiscated, stolen, if you will, by the federal government to Fort Knox. And that is a very critical part in gold's history here in the United States. Huge government overreach, major act of statism, one of the driving reasons why I hate FDR. I would throw that man down a flight of stairs if given the opportunity, and a time machine. Regardless of anyone's opinion on him, I believe there were better men out there suited for the position of president than his imperial self and the individual that he was, and the acts that he exerted here in the United States, and the environment that he created, and the road that he paved for all of us. Continuing on, nobody wanted the good times to end. There was never an international conference where governments agreed to adopt a new world monetary system. When President Richard Nixon, quote, closed the gold window on August 15th, 1971, he said it would be a temporary measure. You saw that speech in the beginning of this video. Very critical, very important. And indeed it was. Nixon himself organized the Smithsonian Agreement a few months later, in which world governments earnestly cooperated to restore the Bretton Woods framework of fixed exchange rates and refix the dollar to gold at $38 an ounce. But they didn't know how. The immediate result was an economic disaster, the stagflation of the 1970s. Considerable recovery was achieved during the Great Moderation of the 1980s and 1990s, when the dollar's value was held around $350 per ounce of gold, by intent or by accident, a crude gold standard system. Alan Greenspan, who presided over much of this time at the Federal Reserve, has hinted rather heavily that this was on purpose. After 2000, the dollar's value declined again versus gold from around $300 an ounce to a near $1,900 per ounce, and then bounced around rather turbulently. Another era of stagnation and disappointment, accompanied by a serial rotation of strange asset bubbles, was the result. Paul Krugman, on the left, once called this post-1971 experience the, quote, age of diminished expectations. Tyler Cowen, on the right, called it the Great Stagnation. If floating currency chaos and macroeconomic manipulation by central banks was such a brilliant innovation, shouldn't there be some evidence of that after 46 years? Even today, the American people can still tell the difference between success and failure. A 2011 poll found that 57% of voters would favor a gold standard system if it would reduce the power of bankers and political leaders to steer the economy. Only 19% opposed. And that is exactly what gold would do. It's that shackle. It keeps the beast in its cage. It restrains the Leviathan state from its monopoly on currency issuance, the expansion of the money supply, and the control of credit and banking in major ways. It's incredible how much liberty gold offers the people. And it's the very reason the founders recognized this and wrote it into the original coinage acts, as well as writing into the Constitution that no state shall emit bills of credit or anything but gold and silver as money. Very important. Very important. The reason that was written was to prevent many of the things we've seen occur as a result of straying from a gold standard from ever happening. The boom-bust cycle. We've heard many of the good schools of economics refer to that and discuss it. I mean, look back to 1987, the bust then. You look at the dot-com bust after that in 99 and 2000. You've seen inflation take place. I mean, the dollar has lost 96%, 98% of its purchasing power since just 1913. This environment that we see where it's punishable to even save money because dollars are always losing value. I mean, you hear those like Warren Buffett saying the worst thing you can hold is dollars. If you're holding a pile of dollars, your wealth is on fire. It's constantly losing its value, its purchasing power, its strength. And that's not a healthy thing. You should be able to save your currency of the realm and at least maintain purchasing power. A dollar today should be able to purchase the same goods and services that it can now 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. That's not the case when these people are constantly destroying currency and constantly printing more of it. Key lesson, and it's a very key point. These are the reasons why this article raises these thoughts, and I think is very important to read, and I hope you're enjoying it. Forget all the silly claims that humanity's long affinity for gold-based money is due to some kind of superstition, mania, obsession, or fetish, or in the words of Bernanke, out of tradition. Economic thinkers have long known that the best money is money that is stable in value, in much the same way as other weights and measures, such as grams, meters, or minutes, also remain fixed and unchanging. The one essential quality that is needed in the article which we use as a basis for exchanging all others is fixity of value, unquote. Andrew Carnegie explained in 1891, repeating what had been conventional wisdom for centuries. And that is a wisdom lost, my friends. That is a wisdom lost. The market economy's basic processes require a stable monetary unit. When the price of oil goes up, more investment and production may follow, while users may reduce their consumption. This is a beneficial and productive response if it is due to real changes in supply and demand of oil, and a nonsensical or destructive response if it is caused by changes in the money. As described in insight-laden detail by George Gilder in The Scandal of Money, 2016, money acts as a sort of information system for the economy. The economy is guided by the economic signals of prices, profit margins, interest rates, and returns on capital. The noise of the carrier, the money, must be as little as possible. The gold link produced this necessary stability. Its imperfections were minor enough that they didn't matter very much. Nobody has found a better way. Mostly, they didn't feel the need to look for one. The International Monetary Fund categorizes roughly 2/3 of all countries today as having some sort of fixed value arrangement, mostly linked to the dollar or euro. In doing so, governments mostly or completely give up domestic macroeconomic management via currency distortion. The main difference between a dollar block and a gold block is the choice of the standard of value. And boy howdy, ladies and gentlemen, when the dollar block finally falls apart, which it will, countries are running from it. They see the flaw. It's incredible to imagine that all these countries put their trust and base their currencies on a floating arrangement with the U.S. dollar, a currency where the government and the banking cartel that manages it are allowed to increase its supply and print them into existence or as digits on a screen at will. And that immediately threatens the value of the other currencies and puts their economies at risk by them being dependent or linked to the dollar. And as we've referred to, the dollar is merely the leper with the most fingers left. It is a rotting, decaying, decrepit, and crippled fiat currency with no value whatsoever other than the faith placed upon that dollar by those who carry it or use it, by the people. And that faith is waning. It's waning like the moon. The best way to achieve this fixed value link is with some sort of automatic system similar to today's currency boards. In practice, currency boards are highly reliable and are not prone to the kinds of disasters that pegged systems suffer constantly, including the disintegration of Bretton Woods' $35 per ounce gold peg. This is critical knowledge that will enable us to avoid that traumatic outcome and instead create the kind of quiet reliability that the British pound enjoyed for more than 2 centuries before 1914. Governments should still be ambitious about managing the domestic macroeconomy, but not through monetary distortion, tax reform, regulatory reform, educational reform, welfare reform, abundant capital creation, and a dozen other advanced promises, the kind of fundamental and lasting improvements that monetary manipulation can never provide. You can't money twiddle your way to prosperity. No country ever has. Haven't we learned this by now? Nathan Lewis. What an exemplary piece of work by Nathan. All of my compliments, sir, to a well-written piece, a well-written article there. And you know what, in reading it again for this piece on the Junius Maltby channel, it just reminded me, there's so many false hysterias around us today. In the news, in the public eye, you see all of this discussion about climate change or this event geopolitically, this threat over here, this terrorist or that terrorist. And really, the biggest thing that people should fear, they're not even talking about. And that is these economic problems. I mean, even when it comes to, they talk about climate change affecting the impoverished or those in countries of need, the poor. Or they talk about wanting to prevent war and the perpetual warfare that we see waged by many of the first world nations, ourselves included. And we've talked about how gold restrains nations from waging perpetual warfare. And you can read about that in Professor Ferdinand Lips's piece on gold wars and how gold can restrain government spending for major military actions only when it is necessary, because the people would then therefore pay for such actions rather than the government just inflating currency or creating currency in order to wage war. Gold keeps them in check. A gold standard would also help the poor, help those who are on pensions or fixed incomes, those who are saving, those who are on Social Security or things of that nature. Not that we should revamp the Social Security system. Believe me, I'm not a big proponent of it at all. Do not support it. If anything, it is government theft. Yes, I agree. However, I'm straying from what I wanted to say here. The main point was, instead of talking about climate change and making changes there in our lifestyle and the way governments do this or the way industry does that or corporations, we really should be focused on this as a people, as a world, as a nation, as communities. The people need to demand sound money again. We need to restore sound money and remove the ability to create fiat from the banking cartels and from statist regimes. Gold and silver need to once again find their rightful place as the ultimate settlement tokens of debt, the extinguishers of debt, the ultimate payments for labor, for goods and services. And all currency should be able to be exchanged for precious metals without punishment, without taxes. Imagine a time where you could go out and pan for gold or run a sluice box in the mountains, in the West, or even anywhere in the United States where gold was found. And you could take that gold to a mint and exchange it for already struck minted coins. And they would take your gold, they would and then assay it and purify it, and they would strike that gold into further gold coins. And that's how the money supply would expand, by gold coming into the mints and being minted. And you could exchange gold that you found for a golden coin. That, my friends, is how the economy should function when it comes to the issuance of currency. You can only issue the gold that you have, and you can only issue the notes that are backing gold and silver. Again, I urge you to go into the archives. I'll post here, as the video closes out, a link to some of those historical pieces that you can go ahead and watch. And I would encourage you also to find the gold archive. It's just videos on gold, and look at some of the other pieces there that tie into some of this information that we just discussed. This was a good summary of it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in here to the Junius Maltby channel. As always, I thank you all for your likes, for sharing the videos and posting them elsewhere, and for your ongoing support and motivation to keep this channel alive and going, to spread this message of sound money and anti-state ideologies. It's very important, I believe, and I believe that at this juncture in history, this type of information is becoming more and more critical to spread by the day. So spread it, talk to your friends, talk to your family, get the message out there during the holidays. Maybe gift somebody silver or gold and teach them some of this information, and send them a link to the Junius Maltby channel. Thanks for being here. Good night.